Hi, welcome to our Sunday at Six Recital Series. We look forward to our performance tonight with Brian Goodwin. And here's Trevor Orthmann.
Thank you, Beth. Good evening. Tonight's Sunday at Six series features our principal horn, Brian Goodwin. These great performances are made possible through the generosity of our season sponsors, the Landmark Automotive Group and Deborah and Daniel Brownstone, our concert and guest artist sponsors, Levi Ray and Show, and the Louise F. and Lauren Wolin Endowed Fund, as well as our media partners, Midwest Family Broadcasting, NPR Illinois, WGLT, WCBU, WILL, WNNS, and WSEC. We are looking forward to our online April in Paris Gala next Sunday since we were not able to celebrate in April. Go to ilsymphony.org for all of the information you will need to participate, including our online auction, which continues until next Sunday evening. We have many incredible experiences and items, including a private recital in your home by our principal harp, Eleanor Kirk, who will be performing an all-French program on next week's broadcast to open the gala evening. A wonderful French dinner prepared by Chef David Radwine at Lisa and Stephen Stone's home. A half a cow from Bunn Farm. The Godfather experience at Bella Milano. A wall of wine, and many other interesting items. We still have raffle tickets available for the Pick Your Paradise raffle, where you can win $3,000 worth of travel to anywhere in the world. And most importantly, you can make a direct gift to help sponsor many of our programs, including helping us bring you more Sunday at Six performances later this year by going directly to Donate Now on our website. Following this evening's performance, you can join us for Coda Conversations in our Zoom room with tonight's featured artist and our music director, Ken Lamb.
Hi, everyone. So Brian Goodwin, he joined the ISO 2 seasons ago as our principal horn after playing a number of seasons in Japan, actually. He brings the highest level of sensitivity and awareness to the orchestra, and is definitely something that the orchestra and myself relies on and pays attention to. He's a little bit like, another conductor from the back of the orchestra and sort of leads the orchestra from the back of the section, and that's I'm always very grateful for. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our performer for tonight, Brian Goodwin.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Ken, Trevor, and Beth. And thanks to everyone who is tuning in from home. You are welcome this evening into my home where I will be performing live for you. I have a short program of solo horn music, which is a little bit interesting because there's not a ton of solo works written specifically for horn without accompaniment or orchestra, something like that. So we'll be exploring some new to you music, hopefully, and music that doesn't get performed as often by horn players. So we're going to kind of go chronologically backward in time, and we're going to start with the English composer Malcolm Arnold. This first piece is called The Fantasy for Horn. This was written specifically for unaccompanied solo horn, and it kind of draws on a couple of different traditions. Malcolm Arnold was an English composer that was alive during the 20th century. He died actually, let's see, not that long ago, 2006. So he lived into the current century, which pretty much makes him a contemporary composer. And he was drawing off of the English merchant marine tradition, which has sailors used to sing songs while they worked, which are kind of known as sea shanties or chanties. There are a couple of English composers that use that a lot. Malcolm Arnold is writing a lot of that style in this piece, which kind of uses rolling melodies. It's written in a 6/8 meter, which is a triple meter. And there's also some elements of hunting calls, which are very traditional for horn, especially dating back to the time before the horn had valves. So without further ado, here is Malcolm Arnold's Fantasy for Horn. So that was Fantasy for Horn by Malcolm Arnold. Next, we're going to be moving backward in time a little bit, and we're moving from England, and we're going to go into the European continent. The next piece is by a French-born composer named Henri Kling. He wrote these 40 characteristic studies, as well as quite a bit of other music. He was a horn player and composer and teacher. So his horn method actually became a very important part of the horn repertoire. But of course, it's not very well known outside of the circle of the horn players. So this one is going to be kind of a 2-for-1, because if any of you out there are horn fans of horn music or horn players yourself, you may be aware that there are 4 concertos and a number of chamber works written for horn by Mozart, which are a very central part of the horn repertoire. There is no solo unaccompanied Mozart for horn. So in this study, Kling wrote a set of variations on a theme by Mozart, and it's called Souvenir de Mozart. And the theme actually comes from one of Mozart's most famous operas, the Zauberflöte, the magic flute. So you may be thinking, the horn is not much like a flute, and you are right. There are actually 2 magical instruments in this opera. One is the flute, which is given to Tamino, and another is a magic bells, which is given to Papageno, and he accompanies Tamino on his quest to go find the Queen of the Night's daughter. So this is going to be the theme of the magic bells and a variation on that theme. That was Souvenir of Mozart by Henri Kling. All right. Next, another French-born composer who actually had his career in France. I didn't mention about Kling, but he ended up in Switzerland, French part of Switzerland, for his career. But going back further, the previous generation is Jacques-François Gallay, who was maybe the most important horn player of the century in France. He was born right at the end of the 18th century, got to get my century right here, 1795, and he lived through the middle of the 19th century. He also was a solo horn player, composer, conductor, and ended up becoming also a teacher at the conservatory. Wrote his own method, wrote many, many etudes. This is a book of his of 12 studies, as the title says. This one doesn't have a cute name or a reference, but an interesting thing about this very lyrical melody is that it kind of goes up and down, but very low, and there are lots of acrobatic leaps, which are a little bit difficult to make them sound easy and graceful, so I will do my best. After I take a drink, this will be number 2 from the 12 studies by Jacques-François Gallay. That was study number 2 by Jacques-François Gallay. Now, up until this point, we've been playing music written for the horn, and in the case of the last 2 pieces, by horn players themselves. Next, we will be moving into the territory of borrowed music, which different people have different points of view on. This particular piece will be familiar to many of you, if not all of you. It's one of the most famous pieces ever written by one of the most influential composers of Western music, Johann Sebastian Bach, J.S. Bach. He hardly needs any introduction. He was a composer and organist in what is now named the Baroque period, but at the time when he was writing, he was considered old-fashioned. And these works were not really widely known until the 20th century, when they became popularized by Casals. So if you recognize that name, you may recognize that I'm referring to the 6 suites for cello. The cello suites have been recorded endlessly by many great cello players, and the repertoire has been appropriated by other instruments as well, other string instruments, some brass instruments, guitar, maybe there are woodwind players, I'm not sure. Bach's music lends itself very well to being kind of taken and put in different instruments, but they all have their own kind of challenges to the repertoire. So the cello suites are written in 6 movements. I will be playing movements 3, 4, 5, and 6. So no introduction and no Allemande, which is traditionally the first movement. But I will be playing the Courante, the Sarabande, Minuets I and II, which are 1 movement, and finishing with the Gigue. So these movements will be from suite number 1 for cello. If you heard in the last piece all of the jumps that were going down into the low range, you may have gotten kind of the impression that there were more than 2 melody lines happening, that there were sometimes melody happening up here, and then also another melody was kind of being outlined, and I was going back and forth between them. Now, that is a technique that Bach exploits to great effect in this piece, because even cellos, even though they can play on multiple strings at once using double and triple stops, generally it is an instrument that can only play 1 melody. So harmonies and different voices of counterpoint are implied in this music. So I have to make some choices that cellists wouldn't necessarily, because a wind instrument can't play the same way. But I am really excited to show you these 4 movements. They're some of my favorites. movements 3 through 6 of Bach's first suite for cello. Okay, give me a minute to catch my breath, and I will introduce the next and final 3 pieces, which are a little bit special. And I will be joined by my lovely and talented partner, Janice Sakai, on violin. So, these next pieces are probably new to just about everyone listening. And that's because these are pieces of classical music written by Black composers. This may sound a little surprising or strange. And that's because generally when we talk about classical music, we're talking about music written by white European men between, the middle of the 1700s and the turn of the 20th century. This is generally what we all think of. Bach, Beethoven, Mozart, Haydn, moving into Brahms and Strauss, Wagner. There are French composers as well. Debussy. Let's not forget everything. But we are generally only talking about European music. But there were a lot of composers of color and women as well that wrote many pieces that have not become part of the standard repertoire. So when I was trying to figure out things to play for this, there was a very interesting project that was brought to my attention, which was started by Rachel Barton Pine, who is a violinist that we've worked with at the ISO. She started this Music by Black Composers project and has so far collected over 900 works, which is extraordinary. And she's been doing most of the research herself. She has published a book of duets or pieces for violin and either piano or second violin accompaniment. So I've selected 3 of these. I will just briefly give you the bare minimum of information about these composers, and we can talk about it more in the discussion after. But the first piece is the Duchess of Devonshire's Reel. Reel is a type of dance with Scottish origins. This was written by Ignatius Sancho, who lived in the 18th century. He was born on a slave ship. Both of his parents died, and he was sent to England, where he was educated, eventually became a free man, and became independently wealthy enough that he could purchase his own home and participate in elections, which is remarkable. He also has the distinction of being the first Black composer with published music. The second piece is by an American, Thomas J. Martin. It's a song that he wrote called Had I Never Known Thee. He was active in New Orleans in the middle of the 19th centuries, and he was a free Black man before abolition, before the Civil War. He was very well known. He had many, many popular works that were published, and he was also a respected teacher of piano. The final piece to round out this trio is the theme from Sonata Number 4 for 2 violins by Joseph Bologna, who was better known as the Chevalier de Saint George. Pardon my French pronunciation. You may have guessed he was a French composer, but that comes by way of him having been born in Guadeloupe, which is a Caribbean island, and at the time it was a possession of the French colony. It was a French colonial possession. He was born to a landowner and a Black slave, so he was mixed birth, and he was an illegitimate son, but he was sent to France also at a young age and educated as an aristocrat. He became very famous as a composer and violinist, conductor. He was adored in the public, and he was very charismatic, and during his life he became the most influential French composer at the time. He influenced many other composers, including Mozart. So without further ado, I'm going to move the stand here. We will set up and present these 3 duets. The Duchess of Devonshire's Reel, Had I Never Known Thee, and theme from Sonata Number 4. Please welcome Janice Sakai. We'll take a quick tuning note and then we will begin. Thanks very much for joining us. I hope you enjoyed it, and please join us in the discussion on Zoom coming up shortly. Thanks.